Okay guys, you need to get out your writer's notebook. I want you to turn to the literature side, and I want you to copy this prompt in there because it's going to be gone in a minute when the timer comes on. So you're going to copy, how does the road address this question? What does it mean to be human? And for 5 minutes, you're just going to write about this question, tying it back to things that happen in the road, symbols in the road, you know, whatever you want as far as this novel goes that seems to be struggling to answer this question in whatever way you think that it does. Okay, so I'm going to give you a minute to copy that down, and then I'm going to turn on the timer. Okay, your 5 minutes starts, well, almost now. Now. time's up. You guys can put away your writer's notebooks for now. And today we're really going to be talking about the Q3 prompt, how we respond to the Q3 prompt in a way that's going to get you a really high score, hopefully, and give you an opportunity to plan for your time writing tomorrow, because I want you to do a good job. So the Q3, this question 3, that's the open question on the AP exam. So remember, we're going to have 3 questions, right? Q1 is the poem. Q2 is the close reading for the prose passage. Those are both things that you're going to have the passage right in front of you. But on Q3, what they give you is this sort of open prompt that's pretty broad. Usually it talks about character development or setting, it talks about symbols, things like that. And then you choose a work that you're going to write about. Now for our purposes this time, you're not going to choose a work. You're going to write about the road, because the road is what we're studying. But the question that we're pulling was an actual question 3 off an exam a few years ago. And question 3 seems like it would be really easy because you get to write about whatever you want. But what ends up happening a lot is that the students sit down and they just tell what happened in the novel. Like, so let me tell you the story about Huckleberry Finn, which gets them a 4 if they're lucky, and a 3 if they're not. And so we want to try to avoid that pitfall. The most important thing, I think, about your Q3 essay is writing your thesis. Because if you set your thesis up properly, then it sets you up to have depth and analysis in your essay instead of plot summary in your essay. So the Q3 prompt always has at least 2 parts. So it'll always ask you basically to do 2 or more things. And the first part is going to be a question about the characters in the work, the themes in the work, the setting, the structure, or the plot, right? So it might be a question focusing on the rural setting and how it affects meaning, right? Or it might be a question about a character and their role in the work or something like that. So the first part's always going to be kind of specific, and you would choose a work that would go directly with that. Like last year, I read Q3, and the Q3 prompt had to do with acts of cruelty. And so the first part of their question basically required them to think about a work that had acts of cruelty in it, and then, obviously identify acts of cruelty that they were going to discuss. That's part 1. The second part always asks you to tie your discussion to the development of meaning or theme in the work. So it'll focus you on some aspect and then ask you to show how it contributes to the meaning of the work as a whole, which is like AP code for theme. Yeah, so 2 parts, which should sound kind of familiar because the assertions we've been writing have already been trying to touch on theme. Now the way the Q3 prompt is set up, and you've got one on your handout, this is the real prompt. This a symbol is an object, action, or event that expresses something or creates a range of associations. This was the prompt that was on the exam. I think it was 09, maybe 2010. Alright, so it often begins with kind of this focus bit. Sometimes it'll give you a quote, sometimes it'll give you maybe a little definition or a little explanation. This isn't really the prompt. This is just giving you some context for what they want you to do. And it really does kind of help you because it gives you some hints on the kinds of things that they want you to look at. So this focus bit on this particular prompt says a symbol is an object, action, or event that represents something or that creates a range of associations beyond itself. So they give you a definition of symbol, which I think is really nice considering most people know what one is anyway. In literary works, a symbol can express an idea, clarify meaning, or enlarge literal meaning. Okay, so this is all kind of helpful, useful information. What it is not is your prompt, right? They haven't asked you to do anything yet. They've just talked to you a little bit about symbols and why they're important. All right, then about halfway through you get the real prompt. Like this is what they want you to do. Select a novel or play and, focusing on one symbol, like the emphasis is mine, but look at the language. They specifically want you to look at one symbol. Write an essay analyzing how that symbol functions in the work and what it reveals about the characters or themes of the work as a whole. Do not merely summarize the plot. They specifically say, do not do that. You don't need to retell the story to these people. These are people who read for a living, right? They don't need to know what happened. They want to know why it's significant or why it matters. So you have two tasks here, right? You always do. Number one, select a symbol. So that's task one. You have to figure out what one symbol you want to discuss. And number two, you're going to examine how this symbol develops meaning or is tied to theme. Now this prompt is a little bit different because it gives you the opportunity to say what this symbol reveals about the characters. But I can tell you for a fact that even if you looked at it this way, instead of going, how does it develop theme? Eventually you have to get yourself to theme, right? So even if we talk about what it reveals about the characters, we still have to tie it to something beyond the work itself. So no matter what, anytime you're writing on a Q3 or a Q1 or a Q2, anytime you're writing, you always want to eventually bring it beyond the work, beyond the novel. Something interesting or complex or problematic about the human experience that we all have to struggle with. So far, so good. Okay. This is the secret ingredient on Q3. And this will be true all year. This will be true, honestly, for the rest of your college career and throughout your life. The secret ingredient is complexity, depth, thinking or talking or writing about something beyond its surface level. Now, sometimes the prompt will actually have the word complex in it. Sometimes they do, like someone's complex attitude toward this or that. That happens more often in Q1 and Q2. But even if it doesn't say complexity, the upper half papers, 6 and above, will always discuss complexity, at least at some level. So maybe a 6 paper, they might have a little bit, they're kind of hinting at complexity but not really developing it. A 9 paper has jumped in the deep end of the pool, right? A 9 paper is really going to think about exactly, what are all the weird implications that this might bring up? And how does this all tie together? And they're doing things in a unique way. If you can find paradox, if you can find ironies, and you can discuss them in a way that's meaningful and interesting, that's always good. And you always, in the end, want to bring it back around to the moral complexities that define the human condition. In fact, using this phrase never hurts. Moral complexities. Because what it's doing is it's saying life doesn't have one simple answer. And neither does this piece of literature. So the prompt that we have at hand, the one about symbols, never says the word complexity. Still, you are going to be isolating a theme to talk about in your paper, and that theme should be nuanced, layered, problematic, or paradoxical, right? It should not be something that is like this little cliche that you can hand somebody on a platter. It's going to be something you have to dig into. Okay, I like examples. So for example, let's say you want to talk about the symbolic resonance of fire in this novel, right? And you want to tie it to the idea of hope. You know that your theme has to have something about hope in it because you know that oftentimes the fire, the literal fire and the metaphorical fire in this book is tied to the sense of hope for the future. All right? So an upper half discussion would acknowledge that fire can be destructive as well as sustaining, right? It's not just the good stuff, but it's both. So can hope destroy as well as sustain one's humanity? So if fire equals hope, and fire is sustaining and destructive, does that mean hope can also be both sustaining and destructive? That's an interesting question, right? And I think you can make an argument for both sides of hope, just like both sides of fire, and then you've got something interesting to talk about, right? Then you have to ask yourself, okay, if that's the case, how is this true in this novel? In this novel, is hope, A, connected with fire, and B, both sustaining and destructive, right? And how does McCarthy use the symbol of fire to suggest this? If the answer to this is no, right? If it isn't true in the novel at hand, then you need to go back and come up with a theme that is true for the novel, right? I mean, you have to have something that you can argue. You can't just go off into left field. All right, so sample thesis statements, right? That would be on your sheet, this top box. So sample things you want to put in here. Remember, they have to be two-part. They have to answer the question and tie to theme. So here we have, McCarthy uses the symbol of fire in the novel to represent hope. All right, I've chosen a symbol, so I've answered the question. I've kind of tied the theme, like I've sort of tied it to a simplistic thematic idea, but I haven't really presented anything to prove or of interest yet. So that's a pretty weak thesis, even though it is a thesis. A strong thesis would sound more like this. McCarthy ties fire, both literal and figurative. That gives me the opportunity to talk about the real fires they make and the fire they carry inside, to the presence of hope, and provides a reminder of hope's power both to sustain and, I said and twice, and destroy the human spirit. All right. So I know I'm not here, but I'm going to throw this question out. I want you to think about it. Why is the second one more likely to yield a better discussion? I mean, here, once you've said, and fire equals hope, you're left with nowhere else to turn, right? Here, you get to prove that hope and fire are specifically tied together in the work, that McCarthy did this, and you get to have this interesting discussion about how hope sustains the man and the boy and how it sometimes can destroy them as well or harm them, right? So you've given yourself so much more to talk about in your essay, and stuff that's interesting and good, maybe, you know, what the reader hadn't read a million times before. Okay, I am going to connect this PowerPoint to the assignments and handouts page of our website, so that if you want to come back and look at the examples, you can, okay? So you don't have to copy this down, but you've got it there, and you've got the explanations from the former slides too. Let's talk about how we fill in the rest of this paper. Now this is not like the boxes we did first week, where we actually were writing a paragraph. This is a planning outline. That's all it is. I've just broken it down for you so that you've got your argument kind of lined out for yourself. But when you're organizing and supporting your thesis for your Q3 essay, you need to remember a few things, okay? You don't respond simplistically. If there's something on the AP exam worth writing about, if there's anything in life worth writing about, then it cannot be written about in a simple way. You're just barely scratching the surface. There are no easy answers. And if you've given yourself an easy essay to write, then you're doing yourself a disservice. You're going to end up with a lower half paper at the most, like if you're really lucky, maybe a 5. You want to show the complexity in the novel. You want to show complexity of thought in your own discussion of the novel. And you always have to keep in mind that oftentimes themes reveal a paradox at the heart of human existence. This idea that hope is, you know, both good and bad for us. Something like that. And in this novel, there's paradox aplenty, so that's nice for you. Anytime you have an essay, you should have more than one body paragraph. But that is not to say there's a magic number of body paragraphs, right? I've seen really, really excellent 2-body paragraph essays for timed writings. I've seen ones that had 4 body paragraphs for timed writings, if the people, you know, are very fast at thinking and writing. I don't count your paragraphs, but if you only have one big block, what that suggests is you're not organizing your arguments. So you want to be sure that your argument's organized into paragraphs that are, you know, serving to prove an assertion, right? And then moving on to the next one. That's the way your reader understands how your argument's developing. Each body paragraph should have a clear and meaningful assertion. That's what's going to go in the minor assertion boxes. So you have the thesis, and then the minor assertions should both serve to prove an aspect of your thesis, right? It all ties together. You have to have concrete support on a Q3. Now, when we practice Q3s at the beginning of the year, I let you use your book. So your concrete support can actually come from your book if you want, but it doesn't have to. So you may use quotes, specific quotes, if you have some already marked and ready, or you can just use paraphrased examples and details from the work. So if I were talking about fire, and I wanted to talk about the destructive nature of hope, then I might just reference their arrival at the ocean and how disappointed the boy was that the ocean wasn't blue, right? So his hope had built up this picture of this beautiful blue ocean. And when he arrived there, because he'd had this false hope, the reality really hurt. And he dove into the ocean, and when he came out, he was changed. So I could talk about it that way. So even if I didn't have my quote from my novel, my detailed explanation of what happened and why it was significant would be enough on a Q3. So you guys can do it either way tomorrow on your timed writing. If you want to use quotes from the book, you can, but you don't necessarily have to. But you can't just be vague. You have to point to something specific that's supporting what you're trying to say. So for your support, you may use concrete details from the text. You may use descriptions of people, of things that happened, of conversations. You may use examples to support what you're saying. Or in your case, because you have the book here right now, you can also use direct quotes or, just little quoted phrases. That's up to you. Okay, your commentary is going to be crucial. Explaining how this evidence supports your assertions and ultimately supports your thesis is where you get your upper half scores. You tell what happened, you get a 4, right? If you make an assertion, give me some support, and then have just a teeny little bit of commentary, you can get a 5. But the more in-depth conversation you have about what you're talking about, and the more insightful and complex your connections become to create this interesting discussion revealing the meaning of the text, the closer you're going to get to an upper half paper. Okay, finally, the conclusion on your timed writing. A does not need to be long. We're talking a sentence or two, but it does need to exist. You can't just be chopped off in the middle, so you have to pay attention to your time. And what you want to do in your conclusion is always bring your reader's attention back to theme. So you probably should have touched on theme in your thesis throughout your discussion. Obviously, there's going to be some themey talk because it's in your thesis and you're trying to prove it. And in the end, what you're doing is you're bringing your discussion, kind of taking the lens off the novel and putting the lens on the world, right? So in a sense, you're saying, this is like life because it is human to hope, but also human to be destroyed by our unrealistic dreams. Something like that, right? So what you're doing is you're always ending on theme, which is a good strategy because remember that the prompt is always asking you to tie to theme. And if you remember to end that way, then you never have the problem where you didn't address part of the prompt and then end up in the lower half. I think I may be done. Okay, so what you're going to be doing in class today is working on filling out this sheet. And what you've got here is your plan for how your essay is going to develop tomorrow. And you may bring this with you tomorrow to your timed writing so that you'll already have your planned evidence, you'll already have your assertions, you'll already know how your argument's going to go, and then you really just have to worry about how you're going to say it. All right, good luck. See you tomorrow.